My name is Reinhold Clinton, and on behalf of Wotan's kindred, bid you welcome. Odin, Freya, Thor, names sacred to our ancestors from the remote past. Today, though, your Americans regard the pagan gods and goddesses of Northern Europe much as they do a favorite eccentric family member. While we hold them dear to our hearts, we nevertheless do not take them seriously. All this may be changing, however, due to the following developments. First, modern physics now has for some time been informing us that the nature of reality is drastically different than previously thought. The idea that the universe is a gigantic web of interconnecting divine energy lends credibility to a nature-oriented pluralistic religion. Terms and concepts that seek to define the existence or non-existence of deity are now seen as totally irrelevant beyond a certain point. It seems then that the gods and goddesses do exist in some form if we choose to accept them. Second, for the past 20 years there has been a concerted effort among a growing number of people on both sides of the Atlantic to reestablish the ancient Northern European religion of Asatru. With its emphasis upon traditional and heroic values, the religion tends to attract members quite unwilling to be sheep led through the nose by a gentle shepherd, preferring instead to forge their own destiny, practice an ancestral faith, and find inspiration in the cold, bracing wind of the Northlands. Wotan's kindred is privileged to have on hand today the founder of this movement. It is now with great honor that I introduce to you highly respected and celebrated author and seminal thinker, Mr. Stephen McNallen.
Thank you, Reinhold, Kathy, Wotan kindred, and guests. I want to thank you for two things. First of all, for the privilege of allowing us to speak before you and to share with you some of the thoughts that we have and some of the developments that have occurred to us and through us and with us over the many years. And also to thank you for your hospitality, which has been very gracious indeed. And I hope that perhaps in the next hour, hour and a half, in some small way, we can start to repay that hospitality and to share with you some of the things that we have. Asatru, something very dear, certainly to our hearts, is a very broad topic, a topic of, in some ways, a great complexity, almost as complex in its own way as this serpent that we see here behind me. But in other ways, it's as straightforward and simple as the thrust of a spear. And I hope that I can convey it that easily, that simply, that straightforwardly. In my comments on Asatru, I would really like to approach it from three different directions, or to include three major aspects of it. I would like to start off with a sort of an overview of what our traditional religion was in the past, a quick survey of our gods and goddesses that are close to our heart, a quick look at the myths, and perhaps even a somewhat more prolonged look at the values that animate our religion and that give it the life and the vitality and the relevance to today that is so very important. I would like also to talk about the revival of Asatru in the 20th century, how this has happened, how it's come about not only in the United States, but in other countries around the world. Share perhaps a few anecdotes of our own related to that, because we were sort of on the scene of the crime as that occurred. And then finally, we'd like to take a look at the future of Asatru. Does it have a future? And if so, what is that future going to be like? What is the potential? What sort of obstacles will have to be overcome to allow us to realize the true potential of this ancient way, yet ever new way, of being and thinking and acting? Well, the old saying is to start at the beginning, and so we're going to start, if not at the beginning, at least an awfully long ways back. Let's go back through the mists of time a little bit, as they say. Let's take a look at Asatru. The word, of course, comes from the Old Norse, the language of the Vikings. It's usually translated as something like those true to the gods, or even the belief of those true to the gods. That's rather much the way we think of it today. And yet we don't mean to be limiting by that. We understand that the Vikings, as dramatic as they were, as outspoken as they were, despite their wonderful vitality and the wonderful image that they give us, they were not the whole of the Teutonic world. There were the continental Germans, there were Teutons flung far and wide across Europe. And this too is, in essence, their religion, their spirit, their way of looking at the world and of approaching it. Nor do I mean to imply that Asatru is isolated off by itself, off in a little compartment, kind of sheltered away. It's not that way at all, because Asatru is really a part of the broader Indo-European family. It has all the usual parallels that you might expect with, for example, the Celts, who, although different in some details of culture, were biologically the same folk, culturally very similar, and with an inner psychology very much like that of the Teutons. It correlates as well with the early Romans, the early Greeks, and yes, even the very early Indians of Vedic India. So that virtually from the Ganges to Germany to Iceland to now the western coast of the United States, we have a continuum, a continuity representative of the Indo-European peoples, the Indo-European traditions and thought and way of perceiving the world. And Asatru is a valid summary for all of that. You don't have to be a Viking to be an Alsaman or an Alsawoman. You don't have to be someone with an uncle living in the Schwarzwald. You can still be an Alsaman as long as you're a part of that broad spectrum. This is your home. This is your spiritual garth, your enclosed area, your protected area, the area of our folk. Well, so much perhaps for the broad outline, the historical background, a quick span of a few thousand years and quite a number of thousands of miles. Let's hone a little bit now in on the content of our religion. What do we see when we look there? Well, an outsider, particularly when they look at Asatru, when they look at our native belief, one of the first things they're going to see are these peculiar to them myths, these stories. And if they are of somewhat typical mind, if they're like the average person on the street, they're going to say, a myth is a fable. A myth is a made-up story conjured up by primitive men and women who had no other way of explaining the universe. It's nothing more than a collection of rumors, misinformation. It has no validity, no truth to it. We know now, of course, that that's false. It's not true. Myth is much more important than that. Myth is much more significant than that. Myth is something very special indeed, and it took a long time for people in the 20th century to start realizing that. Individually, each of us is carrying around a psyche with a couple of major divisions in it. We've got this very above-board, obvious, conscious self. Operates up here, about this level actually, right up in the light, easily accessible. It's rather linear, it's rather logical, it follows some rules that we can more or less predict, and we can more or less get a handle on what happens here. It's right there. But by no means is it the whole story. There's all the rest of us that's kind of tucked away down here in the unconscious, as Jung called it. It's the part of us that's not quite so accessible, not quite so visible, not quite so open to daylight. And there's all sorts of things down in there. There's everything from personal memories that kind of filtered down. They dropped down out of the conscious level here, and they got sealed away down here somewhere in the unconscious. And there are more peculiar things, too. There are other memories. They're memories not of us personally, but memories of our ancestors lying down there, waiting to be tapped, waiting to be discovered. There are powerful instinctive urges welling up, things that we've inherited from our far distant past over tens of thousands of years of evolution and selection and strife and struggle. All of this is there. All of this is real. All of this is important, not only to the individual, but to the group. Just as the individual has this upper and this lower, the conscious, the unconscious, the somewhat rational, and the mysterious and symbol-using unconscious, so does the group. The culture, the tribe, the race as well has this collective unconscious, as Dr. Jung called it. And it is within that collective unconscious that we find those wonderful archetypes that are our gods and our goddesses. So myth serves a function of communication. Myth is the way that that hidden part of us, that unconscious part of us, communicates with the conscious part. It's a sort of code. It's a sort of language. And it's not always obvious. It's not always easy to figure out, but it's there. And it speaks to us. If only we will learn to listen. If only we tune in and get on the right frequency. Spiritually speaking, we can pick up that wisdom, that knowledge, that insight that lies hidden within us. In the individual, a parallel process, perhaps, is dreaming. People have dreams. People have made, I'm sure, vast amounts of money writing books on dream analysis. And there's a certain amount of validity to all of that. In a way, what a dream is to the individual, the myth is to the group. It's as though the whole culture, the whole tribe, the whole race dreamt. And that is their product. That is the content of that part of them that is not obvious. One way of looking at myth, then, is that it is something which is true, but not necessarily true in an obvious sense. It contains truth, but it is not literal truth. A myth is true on the inside, but false on the outside. The stories themselves contain a lot that we need to see and a lot that we need to know. But it's not to be taken literally. It's to be taken figuratively. The important thing about myth, and the thing that produces so much confusion, is the idea that history and myth are one. They're not, clearly. But people of many religions get their myth mixed up with their history. And they start taking it all very literally. They don't realize that myth describes a landscape on the inside of us, an interior landscape of the spirit and the soul. And history describes a landscape that's configured by the mountains and the valleys and all of the things on the outside that we know, the material world. And that's an important difference. Many Christians, unfortunately, get their own mythology mixed up with their history, and then they start having problems. You have problems with things like fossils, for example. You have problems with the physical world. You have problems dealing with science because, oh my goodness, how in the heck are we going to explain this? They don't realize if they would just relax and consider it myth, they'd be on a lot firmer ground. But they insist on making it history. They run afoul of reality. Well, we try not to do that. We understand that the myths are allegories, they're symbols. Useful, true in a sense, real in a sense, but not physical reality. Well, okay. So much for the myths. We've got all these neat stories. We'll assume they mean something. Fine. How about the participants in the myths? How about the players in the myths? How about all of these gods and all of these goddesses and giants and dragons, for crying out loud, and the Midgard serpent and all of these? What about them? Well, we take a similar approach in regards to them. Yes, there is a reality there. No, it is not reality in the ordinary or mundane sense. But that doesn't mean that the gods don't have a reality. Most Christians, thank goodness, are not at a level where they believe that their God is literally an old man with a beard and a long flowing robe, and he's sitting on this chair, and it's probably made out of gold, and it's up in the clouds somewhere. They've gotten beyond that a bit. Well, so have we, obviously. We don't have to conceive of Thor as literally being a power lifter with a flowing red beard who rides around. He's got this big hammer, and he's got these goats, and they pull this wagon of his. We don't have to operate on that level. The pictures that we have of the gods, the images that we have of the gods, are ways by which we can approach the reality of the gods. They are tools. You might even say they're clues as to the nature of the reality, which is Thor, or Odin, or Balder, or Tyr, or any of the other deities of Asatru. These are things that help us tune into that reality. It helps to describe them. It helps us, with our human understandings, to get closer to them and to figure out what is going on with these particular deities. Well, with that said, let's take a quick stroll through the gallery of gods and goddesses. Okay? We've got our hall here, our Hall of Fame, our God and Goddess Hall of Fame. And we'll check out some of the portraits that are hanging on its walls. Okay. Well, here we come to a rather foreboding figure. Notice the one eye. He gave up the other one because he had to give it up in order to drink from the well of wisdom. This is, as you can tell, Odin himself, rather patriarchal looking figure. Notice the spear off which the sunlight is glinting. And in the background you can see his two wolves, and you can see those ravens. Odin, god of mystery, a god of magic, a god restless, always traveling between the worlds, trying to find out more lore so that he can use that lore for the use of gods and of the humans. He's quite a foreboding figure. Maddie and I like to think of Odin also as a god of upward evolution, one who's always striving, reaching for the higher, reaching to go beyond. Well, he's quite a fellow. He, of course, belongs to the family of gods known as the Aesir. And the Aesir are a family that is more oriented towards the realm of things like conquest, warfare, politics, dealing, trying to make the world safe, the worlds safe from the onslaught of the giants and the other forces that would destroy it. Always fighting against entropy. They're keeping the spirit of life going in the many worlds. You'll meet a different family of gods in a moment, but let's take a look next to Odin here. We have his wife, we have Frigga. Now Frigga, you can tell by that wise look in her eye, knows a lot. And she has the ability to see into the future, but she doesn't tell what she sees. She's very wise, and just from this snapshot, this frozen glimpse of her, you may think that there's not a lot there, but you're wrong, because she's really very assertive. And more than once, she has crossed wills and words with her one-eyed husband. Ask the Langobards, they'll tell you all about it. Next to them, of course, is their blustery son, Thor. You all know Thor. Everybody knows Thor. Thor is strong, lusty, blustery, energetic, fun-loving, I think. Rather a friendly sort of god. That hammer he's got there, he uses on the Midgard serpent and upon the giants as well. He's sort of the enforcer of the gods. He takes care of business, keeps the giants at bay, protects the walls, metaphorically speaking, of the realm of the gods, of Asgard, as well as the realm of humankind, or Midgard. Oh, okay, here we've come to Sif, who's Thor's wife. Don't have an awful lot of stories about Sif. We've got a little wisdom of her, a little knowledge of her. She has this wonderful golden hair, which you can see in this picture here. Only thing is, it's not real. It's gold. You see, Loki, Loki the trickster, the less said of him the better, was responsible for it all getting cut off. And so it got replaced by real gold. So there's a whole story behind that you'll have to check up on if you're not already familiar with it. But she's quite a lady in herself. She'd have to be to put up with Thor. Okay, next in line, we're switching over to another family of deities now. We're going to have Frey. Frey is a member of the Vanir. The Vanna are a family of gods much more concerned with fertility, with the creation of life, with the increase of life, with prosperity and joy and pleasure, all of these earthy kinds of things. You'll notice that that Frey is wearing a bit of jewelry. That kind of ties in with his emphasis on prosperity and plenty and doing well in the material world. And you can tell by that gleam in his eye that he's got a lot of energy. He's quite a fellow, old Frey, and he definitely does what he can to enforce the idea of fertility and to keep increase and growth and procreation happening throughout all the worlds. Well, let's see, who do we have next? Naturally, it would be Freya, his sister. She also, of course, is of the Vanir. I don't need to really drive home the point that she's the most beautiful of the goddesses. I think that's obvious to any of us who see her. She's stunning, but don't be deceived. This is not a 10th century version or even a 20th century version of a fold-out queen. She's beautiful, but she's dynamite. Don't mess with her. You'll wish you hadn't. Because she's very assertive, she's very aggressive, she's hardcore. She takes half of the fallen warriors, half of them who fall in battle, go to her. The other half go to Odin. Hard to say who has the better lot, eh? No, Freya, strong, assertive, willful, and again, and deeply involved with this idea of creativity, of fertility, of continuing life. Well, we have some more here. Back to the Aesir for a moment. The one-handed god here, that's Tyr. He only has one hand because he lost the other one. He gave it up so that the Fenris wolf could be bound. So we think of Tyr as really summarizing the warrior virtues, and in particular, the warrior's duty to sacrifice for the good of his people. Because that's what he did, of course, when he gave up his hand. So Tyr is a warrior god. He's also associated with justice. He's associated with the thing, the meeting place, and with the right relationships amongst people. The beautiful one here, Balder, Odin's brightest son, most beautiful son. Yes, yes, beautiful god, Balder. It's too bad that he's slated to be killed by a thrown dart of mistletoe, setting into reaction all of the events leading to the Ragnarok, the great battle at the end of time. Well, look, we could go on and on. There are other figures down there. You can see their outlines a little faintly, but they're a little faint to scholars as well, and they're a little faint to some of us. And it'll be time before we can get closer to them. It'll be time before we can know these gods and these goddesses better than we do. There's a lot to be done there. We have many centuries that we have neglected our gods and goddesses, and we have to rediscover them in a whole new way. And that's a wonderful adventure. But we don't really have time to walk down that corridor now. It's time to perhaps turn our thoughts to other things. It was a very quick survey of the gods and the goddesses of Asatru, but one which I hope was illustrative at least of the basic ideas and the principles that are applying there. Well, let's talk for a moment about the whole lot of them. The whole lot of all the gods, all the goddesses. Polytheistic. Well, you know, actually I've been thinking about polytheism, and I think that on this level it does have certain advantages that should be pointed out just in passing. First of all, polytheism accurately reflects the complexity of the universe. Now, I understand there's an underlying unity and that all opposites can be reconciled on a higher level. You know, I know all of that, you know all of that. But right here, right down here on the material plane where all this stuff is happening, the universe is an immense concourse of forces. We've got countless interest groups, little eddies of will and of action moving back and forth through the universe, through the cosmos. We have a multitude of interreactions every instant. The molecules in this room are interacting furiously, more furiously out there in the light where it's warmer and they're moving around more. But throughout the universe, we have this action. We have this multitude of forces at work. The universe, in some ways, is a complex place. And a family of gods surely represent that idea better than one more abstract, more removed, more distant entity who's supposedly in charge of all of this. The universe can be very complex, very difficult to deal with at times. Any of you who have had to deal with a government bureaucrat understand that. You know the universe is a complicated place. So with a multitude of deities, we can deal with this, we can handle it. Another thing I like about polytheism is that it has goddesses. I mean, I understand that guys like to go off and hang out with the guys, you know, where they can chew and talk dirty and generally, you know, be guys. And women, I'm sure, do the same. But I don't know any man who wants to live in a men's club. I had 4 years in the Army, and that was more than enough. It was time to move on. Goddesses provide a balance. Goddesses represent a whole other aspect of the universe, as every 13-year-old discovers. And, of course, without a goddess, you're halfway to atheism. Got to remember that as well. Third thing I like about polytheism, it has deities that people can identify with. I, for one, cannot identify with some perfect spirit that is behind all of manifestation and makes everything happen. Now, I understand, again, about an underlying essence. I understand that everything can be unified in a sense. But on the other hand, when it comes down to images that I need for my personal spiritual advancement, for ratcheting up that next notch on the evolutionary scale, I need something I can see, something I can identify with, something I can say, yes, I felt like that. Yes, I've experienced that emotion. Or, yes, that's a strength I want. Or, even, that's a weakness I want to overcome. Because our gods aren't perfect. They're not goody kinds of gods. They're gods with failings, with faults. They're a bit like humans writ large. And that appeals to me. I like that. I'm not perfect. And I don't want to be perfect in the goody-goody kind of way that some people have a picture of that. I want to grow, to expand, to go farther, to work my way up the evolutionary scale. And the gods and the goddesses of Asatru are a powerful impetus for me personally in that regard. It's something I can see, something I can feel in my heart, something I can identify with. And I like that a lot. Whew, so far, talked about myths. Talked about gods and goddesses. Okay, fine. Now what? Well, okay, the outsider would say, what does this Asatru tell you about how to live? What are your values? What are your virtues? What are your vices? What's a good life? How are you supposed to live if you do this sort of thing? I mean, is it enough just to be kind of wild and crazy kind of guy? Is there more to it than that? Well, of course, although I have nothing wrong with being a wild and crazy kind of guy either, on the other hand. Years ago, no, not thousands of years ago this time, but in fact only about 10 or 15 years ago, when we were working with the Asatru Free Assembly, we codified 9 statements of virtues that we thought, to us, summarized what Asatru was. And it's not cast in granite. It's not, you know, some tablet carried down through revelation. It's what we humans, it's what we thought. It's what we saw when we looked at Asatru. I'd like to share those briefly with you. The first one we wrote down was, strength is better than weakness. Not exactly earth-shaking, is it? You know that. You wouldn't be here. But a lot of people don't know that. To a lot of people, it's not obvious. The whole cult of the anti-hero in our culture today is built around the idea that it's okay to wimp out. You know, it's okay to take the easy way. It's okay to wimp and to kind of just, you don't have to be strong all the time. Nobody can be strong all the time. It's the old okay to cry crowd, right? Well, obviously we disagree. 4 here, back in our picture gallery for the moment. We open the door real quickly, show you the photos again. 4 was not into weakness. 4 was into strength. We too are to be into strength. We know that, you know that, Conan knows that, and we're all right on with that. Okay. Closely allied to the idea is the second thing we wrote down, which is that courage is better than cowardice. It's better to be bold than to grovel. It's better to exhibit that grace under pressure that Hemingway spoke of than it is to take the easy course out, the easy way out. And yes, this too sounds obvious. It should be apparent to us all, but it's not apparent, I think, to the Phil Donahues of the world or many other people who move around and who get paid a very great deal to express their opinions. Third thing we wrote down is that joy is better than guilt. We are made to feel guilty for so many things these days. I don't see how people can bear up under the burden of it. We've kind of shaken off a lot of the guilt feelings about sexuality. You know, there's the old Victorian prudishness that, you know, was way out of proportion, and people have kind of swept that out, not entirely, but there's huge amounts of other things that people are really eager to be guilty about. Oh, wow. Let's see, this week we can be guilty because we get angry, because we're not mellow, because we lose our temper even. Now, I happen to think that control of your temper is better for other reasons. But the feeling itself, as far as I'm concerned, is okay. There are times we need to get angry. There are times we need to let that come through. Many of our instincts that are healthy instincts, good instincts, have been turned away with sort of a new age, crystal clarity, ooh wow, we're going to be one big family, and ooh wow, we're just going to ever be so mellow, and we're going to be bored to death. Our heritage as people of Northern European descent is something else we have been made to feel very guilty for. Over and over and over, the media, the music, from every end, every angle, we get the message, what horrible people we are, how guilty we must be. Everything in the world must be our fault. Nonsense. Nonsense. That's the politest way I can put it. Nonsense. No, this kind of guilt, just like the other kinds of guilt, all of this has got to go. We need to experience the joy, the pleasure of self-assertion. We need to understand that our instincts, properly used, properly controlled, are good. We need to understand that we are not the world's punching bag. We are not the world's scapegoat. We are not responsible for, in any sense, the miseries of this planet. We have a lot to offer, and we need to understand that guilt must not get in the way. Honor is better than dishonor. The heroes of the sagas, the gods themselves, our modern day heroes, people not afraid to take a stand, people not afraid to put it on the line, people not afraid to face their urlog, their fate, people willing to accept misfortune, to accept, even if necessary, a death when that is called for. These are people who understand the importance of honor. People who will take the right course of action, raido, the right action in a particular circumstance as determined by the interactions of the norns. This is important, and it is something that our modern world seems sadly to have forgotten. Freedom is better than slavery. And nice, easy slogan, anybody can use it. Too bad most people think they're free. There's a couple of different kinds of slavery. There's the very obvious slavery. There's the slavery of people who do have chains on their wrists. There's the gulags of this planet in so many different countries. Yes, there are secret police that knock on your door in the middle of the night. Yes, there are prisons that people are thrown into and they never appear from. That's true. Yes, all that's slavery, or unfreedom, if you will. But how about the other kind? How about the kind of slavery of people who sit on their sofa and watch their television and believe they're free? Oh, they're free. They're free to buy things. They're free to consume. They're free to go and work themselves to death and then spend themselves to death trying to meet the standards that they are told that they have to follow. sometimes freedom is not easy to find in a world where slavery comes with velvet chains. Kinship is better than alienation. We live in a world, again, where not only are we not free, but we are atomized in our slavery. We are split apart from each other. We have come to think of ourselves as nothing more than little produce-consume units. We're all interchangeable, and we all fit in wherever the system wants to put us. But we're separated, often from our immediate family, from our extended family, from our co-religionists, from other members of our broader folk outside us. We have no identification with anything except an atomized individual. And it's not that the individual isn't important. The individual is very important. But that individuality often can best be maintained in interreaction with the web, the network of like-minded individuals, of blood relatives, the folk. Realism is better than dogma. This goes back to what we were saying about myth and history earlier, actually. Asatru doesn't wear blinders. Asatru doesn't deny the material world. It doesn't deny science. We can deal with fossils, unlike members of some other religions. We can deal with quantum physics. We can deal with the realities of the modern world. We're not going to be locked into the 9th century or the 10th century. We want Asatru in the 20th and the 21st and the 25th and the 30th century. We're not blinded. We're not dogmatic. There is no room in Asatru for dogma. There is no Pope of Asatru, and there never will be. We think free. If we disagree, we say so. If evidence comes along and we need to change our minds, we change our minds. We don't insist that the world is really flat and there's a dwarf literally on each corner, north, south, east, and west. The times change, but we're on top of that. We're in charge of it. We're not locked into the past. We deal with the present, we turn it to our advantage and to our will, and we work with it. Vigor is better than lethargy. Vigor is how we express our will in the world. Vigor is the energy, the power pack, the propulsion unit that lets us work our way, work our will. Without it, we can have great ideas, but if we sit on the sofa and just kind of do this, we won't make it. It's important to have vigor. Certainly that's one thing that characterized the Vikings as much as any other virtue, is vigor, the energy, the outgoing, overflowing, bursting out energy, characterized also by a wonderful spring day like this as well. Upswelling life, continually expressing through the individual and through the group. Finally, the last one we wrote down, ancestry is better than universalism. Tens of thousands of years of evolution in a particular environment has given us a set of particular virtues and vices. It has made us what we are. The experience of other branches of the human family are different. We must be true to what is in us. We are more like our ancestors than we are like anyone else. It is to our ancestors then that we have to look. It is to our innate soul as a people that we have to look. Because from our ancestors we have acquired wonderful things. Not the obvious, not just the obvious, but the other qualities that are subtler, but so important. We are one with our ancestors. One of the traditions of Asatru is that we are reborn into our clan line. We are our own ancestors, in a sense. I find that an interesting thought, Comforting in some ways because it keeps it all within the family, but intimidating in other ways because it puts the ultimate responsibility right back on us. If we want to come back into a world, say 100 years from now, as our own great-grandkids, and if we want that world to be a decent place, then we better do something about it, hadn't we? We'd better do something while we're here. There are no free rides. The responsibility is ultimately up to us. There's no one else to blame. And that's good, because that kind of responsibility gives us strength, gives us the opportunity for heroism. And there's not much more else that we can honestly ask for. So, 9 virtues. Correspondingly, 9 vices. Opposite courage, we have cowardice. Opposite honor, we have dishonor. So forth. You could make up a little chart. I'm not a chart maker. I probably would have done that. The good life, the right life in Asatru consists simply in maximizing your personal set of virtues and minimizing your personal set of vices. It's that simple, I suppose. Now, if a lot of these virtues, if a lot of these desirable characteristics in the individual sound familiar, well, doggone it, I guess there's a reason for that. Because they're nothing more, nothing less than what traditionally we have thought of, rightly or wrongly, but traditionally we have thought of as the all-American virtues. You know, you think of the characters of the Old West. You know, tough, independent, hardy, forthright, honest, straight-speaking. You know, I know we're dealing with archetypes and not realities, okay? But all of these things, yes, of course these are familiar. They're the basis of what we have come to think of as Western civilization, or certainly the best in American civilization. So yes, yeah, those are familiar. But what people don't realize is that these values didn't come to us out of the Middle East. They have nothing to do with the Middle East. We get them directly, honestly, straightly from our own people, from our own ancestors. They're not imports, they're domestic products. So we should buy, right? Okay. What so many people, even so many people of good intent, so many people of earnestness don't understand as well is that so many of our institutions, our political institutions, our social institutions that we think of as promoting freedom also derive from our ancestors. I think that if you talk to most Christians, they will tell you that our political freedoms are derived from the Bible. We know better, of course. Go back to essential things like trial by jury, a Nordic institution. Common law. Guys, they don't call it Anglo-Saxon common law for nothing. It wasn't imported from the Middle East. It comes from us. In fact, what you might be interested in informing people is that the very word law does not come to us from the tongues of the Middle East. It doesn't come to us from the languages which Christianity reached at an early point. The word law derives directly from the Old Norse and the Anglo-Saxon. It doesn't come from an outside people. It's ours. And yet we have all been given the slander that our ancestors were uncouth, crude, lawless, uncivilized barbarians. And a slander is what it is. The very word law is ours. The very concept is ours. The idea of parliaments evolved from the Germanic thing, the tribal meetings. Evolved up through the Althing, of course, in Iceland. Similar institutions on the Isle of Man and other places. This is where we get our traditions of self-government. This is where we get our traditions of civilized men and women coming together, solving their disputes in an honest and fair way, without decrees from some higher power, but organically, grassroots level, roots level. This is us. The idea of limits on the rights of rulers. The idea of keeping those guys off our backs. This also is a tradition that goes back to pre-Christian times in Scandinavia and throughout the Teutonic world. One of the greatest conflicts that we had with the kings who were early converted to Christianity is their incredible desire for centralization, for extending that royal reach into everybody's pocketbook, into everybody's pocket of any sort. The Heimskringla, for example, Snorri Sturluson's magnificent collection of sagas about old Norway at just about the time of the so-called conversion to Christianity, is replete with examples of this. Over and over and over, you've got the pattern of a king, royal guy, right, wants more than he's got, converts to Christianity, says, aha, what a nice tool for making sheep out of my wolves. And so he goes in, he converts them, kills the ones that won't cooperate, exiles the troublemakers, takes things over, confiscates their lands, centralizes power, centralizes authority, in direct defiance of the law of the folk, in direct defiance of the traditions of the folk, and to his own aggrandizement. In so many ways, we must remember, it wasn't just people outside our folk group that are our problem. Our own greed, our own loss of tradition, our own loss of perspective and of spiritual insight has run us afoul so many times. Correspondingly, the opposite of the Livingstone rulers, the other end of that particular stick is the rights of freemen, and to a great extent also the rights of women. All of these were developments of our pre-Christian traditions in Northern Europe. Asatru is the root of these. Women were much freer in the ages of the Vikings than they were a couple of hundred years later under Christian rule. And similarly, correspondingly, the rights of all the freemen shrunk and shrunk and shrunk. The idea of divine right of kings is not a heathen, not an Asatru institution. Well, so far, we've covered a lot of ground. My goodness. We've gone from the Ganges to the West Coast. We've gone from 40,000 years in the past, Carlton Coon's figure, all the way up till, well, we've actually mentioned about the 30th century, haven't we? We've covered gods. We've covered myths. We've talked a little bit about the values of our ancestral faith of Asatru. I'm going to take a short break, and then I'm going to come back, and we'll talk a little bit about the 20th century revival of Asatru and what we hope will be perhaps a lot farther down the line developments in Asatru. So let's take a break, get a drink or two, get my sugar fix over there, and a little caffeine, and we'll drive on. Thank you. Yeah, we're still bringing people out. We're not ready to. Well, a while ago, we, as I say, covered an awful lot of ground and an awful lot of time. Time and space is something that we really played liberties with there. We roared all the way from the beginning of our existence as a people, conservatively 40,000 years, could be much, much more than that depending on your favorite anthropologist, all the way up, zipping through the present as though it were just the tiniest little bubble in space-time, whizzing on down to the other end, 30th century. Terrific, nice advance on the regards of front of time. In terms of space, we've covered at least half the globe. And then, one could go a lot farther than that, I suppose. Actually, during the breaks, I commented to someone that I'd like to have my kids mining the asteroids someday, so I suppose we actually got out a little bit farther than that. Well, we're going to get a little bit closer to home now, a lot closer to home, in fact, both in space and in time. We're going to talk about the revival of this ancient religion of Asatru in the 20th century. Asatru was severely suppressed and repressed by the Christian kings who came into Scandinavia, as well, of course, as those on the continent, Charlemagne's slaughter of the Saxon nobility being only one example of the genocide that was conducted against us. An incredible amount was lost. There are just fleeting, brief references to some myths in the surviving texts, and we don't have the myths that they're referring to. Manuscript after manuscript evaporated. Tale after tale was lost. Beowulf, I believe, survived only by luck. There was a manuscript found in some obscure place that wasn't going to make it otherwise. Similarly with much of our other ancient lore. However, since religion, all true religions spring from inside. They don't come from the outside world. They're not primitive man's explanations of the outside world. They are our own inside world's explanations to us. And so it doesn't go away. It's all in there. If we can just tap it, we can reach inside with pure instincts, reach inside, tap into the wisdom that is there. It's within us as a people, within our very genes. So it was only natural that sooner or later it was going to reemerge. Sooner or later, when the time was right, it was going to well up again. And sure enough, it did. Various and sundry forms, some of them literary movements more than anything else. Gothicism in Scandinavia, the Romantic movement on the continent incorporated a lot of heathen Asatru type motifs. You had a growing interest in mythology and in comparative mythology through comparative linguistics, and a lot of this kind of stuff was going on right on the edges of the scholarly worlds. And then other things started happening. A fellow named H. Rudd Mills in Australia revived Odinism, as he called it, and developed it along his particular line of progression. And then in other places you had things happening, for example, around turn of the century, a little before and a little after, you had a number of continental German groups that became interested in the runes, became interested in Teutonic mythology, Teutonic mysticism, sort of theosophical offshoots, all sorts of little things happening, little bubblings, little ferments rising up out of the collective unconscious. And all of this is as though it were just setting the stage. Time passed. Things started heating up. And some of this I can speak about, I guess, with some degree of authority because I was there. I was there when it happened, guys. And so I'd like to tell you for a couple of minutes about the birth of what became the Asatru Free Assembly in the United States and some of the strange events that surrounded that. Long ago, and I may look old, but actually it was only when I was in my 20s, or late teens, in fact. I had gone off to college. My Catholicism in which I'd been raised was already being badly eroded by little things like the issue of free will, the fact that I didn't like tyranny in any form, and so forth. And so I was ripe. I was ripe. I'd been sniffing around the edges of some of the occult material, and I'd read some of the Eastern stuff, and I'd read a little theosophy, and I thought Aleister Crowley was a really bad dude and stuff like that. Well, you know, a lot of that looks kind of silly in retrospect now, but you know, that's what people do. Here I was, as a freshman at college, I was wide open, I was vulnerable. This guy was ready to take a spiritual rocket, and wham, it happened. But it happened not because I was searching for, wow, truth or enlightenment or any of that stuff. I was looking for a good novel to read. Well, I found it. It was not great literature, as my wife will readily agree. It was something called The Vikings, a historical novel by a fellow named Edison Marshall, who churned out historical novels like crazy, I guess, for quite a while. Before I even got to the end of this book, wow, I was convinced. When it came down to virtues, when it came down to people to emulate, the Vikings had it over the monks. The monks lost this guy. Well, you know, actually, my father always wanted me to be a priest. I don't think this is quite what he had in mind. But as life went on, as the days went on, the weeks went on, I realized that something was happening inside. And it wasn't instant. You know, there was no, blinding light on the road to Damascus kind of scene. What happened was that I thought, gosh, I really like these heathen gods. I really like this Odin. I mean, this is a hard guy, but he leaves you alone, really. You know, he doesn't ask for your soul. You don't have to kiss up to him. and if you tried, he'd probably kick you in the teeth. And I liked that. That's honest. That's straightforward. I liked that kind of a virtue. And so I started reading a little more about this sort of stuff, and it started sinking in a little more. And it wasn't like I went out the next day and, dedicated myself to the old gods. It wasn't that quick, because I still had a lot of conditioning to overcome. But within a couple of months, it was pretty plain what I had done. I had accepted Odin, father of the gods, as my own deity. This was the God I wanted to follow. Now you've got to realize that in rural Texas in 1967 or 8, this was a pretty radical kind of statement. Well, I didn't state it to an awfully lot of people. It's not that I was ashamed of it, but who do you talk to about this sort of things? I had my usual crowd. We hung out and we partied a little bit, and they knew where I was coming from, and we'd all get together because they could identify with lots of it. They really could. They weren't religious in the conventional sense, and they liked the approach of the Vikings. And so as time went by, they understood where I was coming from. I took a photograph out of National Geographic of a Thor's hammer. Must have been about 1977. I bet you've all got the issue at home on your bookshelf somewhere. And I took it down to a jewelry shop. And I said, make me one of these. And they did. They made me one. That was my first Thor's hammer. And I was so proud the day they brought that out to me. It was terrific. And I wore that for a long time. And of course, I've worn its replacements rather regularly. A friend of mine really dug it. He thought it was great. He said, hey, I want one of those too. There's a guy named Rick. I won't give his last name. I want to preserve his privacy to some extent. But he became a Cobra pilot in Vietnam and wore it throughout his tour there. So here's a warrior. Whatever you thought of that particular fracas is not really relevant at this point. But here's another warrior who, in the 20th century, was wearing the hammer of Thor. Well, this continued on kind of a personal level for a long time. And I wasn't really in a proselytizing mode. It didn't matter. I wasn't out to convert other people. I was just reveling in being truly different, truly individualistic, doing something that was just right for me. And then the time went by, and at that point, the Jesus freak movement was quite strong. And I'm rather laissez-faire on that sort of thing. I don't care. If people want to follow Jesus, then they should follow Jesus. On the other hand, these people were really irritating. They were in-your-face kind of people. And I don't like people in my face. And so, naturally, I got a little pushy back. And so I thought, look, guys, it's time to do something about this. It's time to implement a plan. So we launched, me and a couple of other crazies, launched the Runestone. First issue. Oh, we were ever so proud of it. Had a run of 11 copies, I believe. But we were on our way. We had begun. We had Odin Lives bumper stickers printed up. Garish, outrageous, red on black. We loved it. It was really hooah. We had a couple of hundred of those. We took them around. We put them on our cars. We sold them to people through the mail. We had a great time. And again, in rural Texas, this was an interesting development. We weren't able to get a second set of them run for some reason. So that was only the beginning, and then I finished college, and Uncle Sam comes knocking. Kind of put on the green, guy. Put on my green. Entered the Army, 4 years. That's what I owed him. I do recall that early in my Army career, if you want to call it a career, I had to get a replacement set of dog tags. And I was down at the jump school at Fort Benning at the time. And I went down there to a little building down by, maybe you've seen pictures of those 200-foot towers they drop guys out of for parachute training. It's really awesome. But went down there and I had to get my replacement set. And the little old lady sitting there, typing in the information and all of this good stuff. Well, okay, she got my name right. She got my blood type right. Time for a life change, guys. I didn't even know the word Asatru at the time. We hadn't discovered that yet. This was organic, grassroots, one man and a few others with, fixed spear points running up the hill against the establishment kind of stuff. And so I didn't even know the word Asatru, so I said, put Norse. And she did. And I wore those through jump school, some other schools, and for a long, long time thereafter. The ones I wear now, because I still do this sort of thing on weekends, they say Asatru, and I'm proud of that. I have no problems with that. Well, obviously, it's a little hard to do the infantry thing and do a religious thing like this at the same time. So the organization, the movement suffered, as they say. But the day came when I got out, shucked off the green, and moved to, Thor, don't ask me why, Berkeley. Well, here I was in Berkeley. Berkeley's an interesting sort of place. I had an interesting time in Berkeley. We held meetings, because by now the room's starting to grow to 100 and some odd subscribers. We thought that was really going to town. We held meetings in a little office on University Avenue, you know, with, in so many ways, our cultural opposites walking up and down the streets. People who would not even identify with what we were doing. But we'd go back there and devoutly sacrifice to the gods, make offerings to the gods, practice our religion, talk up our religion, support each other. It was about that time that we adopted the name of Asatru Free Assembly. Before that, it had been, well, Viking Brotherhood is what we called it for a long time. But, you know, that was bound to change as we expanded our role and realized the depth and the sincerity and the importance of what we were doing. We did sacrifices, or blots is the actual term. And I want to emphasize, we're not talking bloody sacrifices. You know, we're not out there slaughtering chickens or doing anything of that. But sacrifices, nonetheless, of our will and our works and our feelings to the gods out in Tilden Park, up in the Berkeley Hills. We did the first public Odin blot, a sacrifice to Odin, which perhaps stirred things up a little bit, even in Berkeley. And, and we started holding our All Things, our annual meetings, that are still being carried on under the auspices of the Asatru Alliance in Arizona. Well, time went by, other things happened, moved to Northern California, got out of the cities, moved to the sticks, which is kind of where I prefer it anyway, and real expansion started. We started doing a lot more energetic publishing. We started experiments in local outreach. We started getting it together. Then, again, another change, life not being a constant, or the only thing being constant being change, moved to Texas. I'm from Texas originally. Moved there to help out in the family business. Spent a couple of years in the oil industry until the price of oil got so low in the mid to late 70s that it wasn't worth taking out of the ground. But while we were there, we did some wonderful things. We published rituals. We made tapes. We had half a dozen different tapes that we were offering. We wrote booklets. We published booklets, at least one of which we have over here, What is Asatru, which is sort of, well, I guess it's my Catholic background, so it's sort of a heathen catechism sort of thing. Most of these things are still available, again, through the Asatru Alliance in Payson, Arizona. I'd be glad to give anybody an address who's interested in that if you don't already know about them. We developed membership. We developed local congregations called kindreds. They started dotting the map across the country. We developed guilds, sort of like special interest groups. And some of these were quite ancient and traditional. We had mead-making guilds, and I think that was probably one of our most successful ones. We had, you know, a lot of things with a real antiquarian flavor to them, but on the other hand, we had things that were quite the opposite. They were very outreaching and modern. We had, get this, an aerospace technology guild. We had people who were into planes and missiles and rockets and stuff. And they would meet, and one thing that they did, last couple of All Things that we held in Texas, was to begin the All Thing by launching a rocket, you know, little model rocket. And in fact, I understand it's a tradition that they're still carrying on at the All Things, and I think that's pretty neat. The whole point was that Asatru is not something to lock away 1,000 years ago. We're alive now. Our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, which, if you want to look at it in a way, is us too, are going to be living in the future. So let's accept that. Let's enjoy that. Let's appreciate that. There's a lot of life to live, and it's not all in the 10th century. Other good thing we did, the Poetic Edda. One of the most important source works of our traditional belief. Very hard to find. Books like this go out of print. They're of interest mostly to academics or to a handful of students in a Scandinavian department somewhere. We got together a bunch of people. We did a letter writing campaign. We pushed the idea. We got it reprinted by the University of Texas. That's the Lee Hollander translation of the Poetic Edda. We thought that's one of the very good things that we did at that time. Not to say that it was always easy. I love Texas. I truly love Texas. I love my fellow Texans. But my goodness, when you're a heathen, it can be awfully rough in rural Texas. I mean, they don't understand. They should understand. You're not going to find a more independent, more cussed bunch of rugged, no-nonsense tolerating bunch of individuals hardly anywhere. But they don't understand the theology. It's a little intimidating to them. So we did have some run-ins with the locals. There for a while after the price of oil dropped. I'm starting to talk with a Texas accent, aren't I? There for a while after the price of oil dropped so low that you couldn't take it out of the ground, I took a job as a jailer in a county jail. Well, the advantage was it gave me time to sit there and answer correspondence and write stuff and plan things and all of that. But it did run into problems every now and then because, by golly, see, we had this big extravaganza because we had opened a Northern European Heritage Center there in town, sort of as a focus for our fronts. We thought we were being horribly conspiratorial, sort of. I mean, everybody's heard of Marxist-Leninists, but who ever heard of an Asatru Leninist, right? The true spirit of revolution. And one of the things that we featured was to bring some SCA people in from the Dallas-Fort Worth area over to do a fighting demonstration on the courthouse lawn. Now, we thought that was pretty innocent, right? But you wouldn't believe the furor that stimulated locally. We had so much hassles. And here I was, you know, right at the center of the legal establishment or the law enforcement establishment of the town. Oh, God, you know, and the sheriff's looking at me kind of like this, you know, who is this guy really? It was interesting. It was interesting times. Opening the Northern European Heritage Center in itself was an interesting experience because here we are, I bet counterculture maybe gives kind of the wrong impressions, but in a way, yeah, we were definitely outside the mainstream. Here we were coming in doing this really bizarre thing. But the way it worked locally was that the Chamber of Commerce was required by their, the way they operated there, to send all their guys around in their three-piece suits and have a ribbon cutting kind of thing. And so it was really wild. Here we were, you know, radical Asatru consciousness revolutionaries wheeling in from the fourth dimension, and here's, you know, the president of the local bank standing like this. Now, you may think, looking at it, that I would fit in there, and I you know, chameleon job. Hey, you know, I learned about camouflage. I can do that stuff. But it was, as they say, interesting. Well, anyway, time went by. We had extended ourselves an awfully long way, and there was a lot going on. I feel that the AFA tried to do perhaps too much too soon. I don't regret that. There's no apologies there. I'm not into apologies, not in that sense, not into groveling, not into regrets. But nonetheless, we had extended ourselves awfully far, and it was time to back off a little bit. We were very tired. We were a bit on the burned out side. There was a lot happening. And, well, when it's time, you know. When it's time, you know. What's the old thing? Lest one good custom should corrupt the earth, or something Arthurian. I don't remember quite where that comes from. But then came the stage that we call, Maddie and I call, the lacuna. A lacuna is usually it's a term to describe in a manuscript, like, you know, Beowulf or any of the old manuscripts, a gap, a hole, you know, a place where the worms ate the words, you know, and there's nothing there. Well, this was sort of our lacuna. We dropped off the pages, dropped, you know, off of flat land and into another dimension a bit, and we took some time off. We spent about 5 years knocking around and traveling and being poor and going strange places. We moved back to Northern California, lived up in the hills in a little virtual ghost town. Chopped our own wood, flumed water out of a stream, lived on nothing. Oh, it was beautiful. It was beautiful. The challenges were beautiful. The scenery was beautiful. There was no danger of forgetting the gods, especially in a place like that. We kept it pretty much on a family level. We never forgot. It was there, and it was waiting. It was gestating. We knocked around a lot. I did a lot of writing, mostly for military magazines. We went to Tibet. We went to northern India and interviewed Tibetans who had fought against the Chinese, got that written up. We went to Burma and lived with insurgents along the border there, and we did all sorts of neat stuff. But always, 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 Asatru was there. Always the gods were there. Up in the Himalayas, went up way up in some pass, Kelong Pass, I guess, heading up towards Tibet there, but still a few miles the Indian side of the border. And I really admired the Tibetans, and I respected their beliefs, and of course they had all their prayer flags fluttering in the thin Himalayan wind, and it was lovely. It was lovely, and I thought, this place needs a herg, an altar, if you will. And so we took some rocks, and we erected a herg, or an altar, and I used my Thor's hammer, and we consecrated it up in northern India. I'm sure it's still there. So the essence never left. The real things that were motivating us never left. Well, we're back again. Just about a year ago, we decided to start publishing the Runestone again. It was time. We had things to say. We're back on the scene. We're ready to go. We're fresh. And so we're publishing the Runestone. I'm sure you've seen the copies over there. It says number 1, 2, and 3 on it, but it's really like probably 60 or 70, 1, 2, or 3, something like that. We're publishing other stuff. We've just done a manual on daily living Asatru, a way of living religion without being stuffy, a way of living religion and have fun at the same time. You know, we're not into the straight-faced approach to religion. Religion is much too important to do in a grim, straight-faced, humorless way. It's got to live. Also, there's a book on runic affirmations that is Maddie's work entirely. My name's on it. I think I proofread it or something. I'm not sure, you know. It's her work. And I think it's a useful addition to the literature. Anyway, here we are again. We're back in business. Here we are. It's in the present. We're up here with a lot of very fine people, a lot of energetic people who are doing a lot and who deserve, by the way, your full support. And some wonderful endeavors coming down the line. All right. Pulled it up from one end of the time scale. We're sitting on this, you know, infinitely thin present here. Let's make the jump into the future. What, if anything, does the future hold for Asatru? Is Asatru a fluke, a freak, movement not to be taken seriously? Is it going to disappear like the dew in the morning? Or is there a future for Asatru? And if there is, what form will that future take? And what obstacles must Asatru overcome in order to have a future? I'd like to turn that question around. I'd like to ask, is Christianity a fluke? And if that seems like a strange thing to say, consider for a moment. 40,000 years minimum. You know, that's Carlton Kuhn. I think they keep pushing back the date at which our people came into existence, at which our branch of the human race matured and became identifiable. But 40,000 years minimum, okay? 40,000 years, and we have been Christian for significantly less than 2,000 of those years. That's about 2% to 4% of our existence as people. That's nothing. That's nothing. Christianity could well be the fluke. For all of this other time, we were either Asatru or some other permutation, some other expression of our inward soul as a people. Christianity is a strictly modern, early this morning kind of imposition. and to assume that it represents our future, or to assume that some universalist mishmash religion designed for a classless, faceless, nameless bunch of people on the planet is our future is not necessary. And I hope, and I suspect, not true. We've got to remember that we were also folk for countless millennia. We have been Christians of one sort or another for significantly less than 2,000 years, depending on what part of the wave northward you want to count. That's one reason that I'm optimistic about the future of Asatru. Another reason is what I call the hidden Asa folk. There's a whole tribe of people out there that are Asa folk that don't know about each other. They don't know they're a member of a tribe. Spiritually they are, but they're not in touch with anybody. On that day, so many years ago, when I decided that Odin was going to be my god, I thought I was the only man on the planet doing that. When I took that picture of a Thor's hammer down to the jewelry store, I thought this was probably the only one on the planet being worn today. In retrospect, that's very naive, but that's what I thought. Oh, I thought I was so bold. When we were running the AFA, the Asatru Free Assembly, we kept getting letters from people saying, I've been doing this for 10 years, but I thought I was the only one. Or, Odin's been my god, or Thor has been my god, or Freya has been my goddess for, years and years. But I never realized there was an organization. I never knew there was a movement. This was a routine form of letter we kept getting. And it was wonderful because I knew how those people felt. I'd been there. Well, we got them hooked up. And there's a lot more of them out there. When we were in Burma, we were living in the headquarters of the insurgent force fighting the Burmese government there. And a lot of people drift in and out of there. Quite a few round eyes, writers for this magazine or that magazine, or other round eyes teaching sniping or whatever it is they do there. And there was one fellow, German fellow, didn't say very much, kind of taciturn sort of fellow, who had been there every summer for about 10 years. This guy would leave his job in Germany, come and live along the Salween River and work with the Karen tribe, or actually ethnic group, not really a tribe. He came partly to do physical therapy with them, and I think he was teaching sniping on the side. Anyway, you do get in some interesting conversations. You're sitting around, you're in this hut, with your palm leaf sort of thatch, and it's open sides, and you're sitting around this table, and there's a candle, jammed into an empty 50 caliber casing on the table. That's your light source. And you're sitting there feeling ever so Hemingway-esque, and you get into some great conversations. Do you ever? And in the middle of one with this German fellow, I'd kind of fished around inside my shirt, and I don't know why, had pulled out my hammer, my Thor's hammer, and was just had it there in my hand. And there was an instant reaction on his part, a real recognition. And he looked and he said, "What's that?" I said, "Well, this is my Thor's hammer." He reached inside his tunic and pulled out his. He had had it made himself. He was not a member of an organization. He was a man who wore it and who had it made because it was the right thing to do. He didn't need an organization. He was one of the hidden Asa folk. There's a line from the Odin Brotherhood. It says, what is an adventurer? It says, an adventurer is someone who does great things in the spirit of play. And I like to think that man, that German fellow on the Salween, was a true adventurer. He should have smiled a little more to be an adventurer, I think, but that's another story. Okay, all right. So that's another reason I'm optimistic about the future of Asatru, is the hidden Asa folk around the world. What are the chances of 2 guys, 3 people, counting Maddie, sitting in this mosquito-infested third world hellhole
and all of us pulling out Thor's hammers, and there we were. It was
Quite a moment. Synchronicity working overtime. Another reason I'm optimistic, instinct, ties back into all of this. Instinct, we still got our instincts. All of this upwelling of archetypal life inside, it's still there, it's still valid, it's still sound, and there's lots and lots and lots of people out there who don't know about Asatru, who consider themselves Christians, and yet their values, their essential way they want to look at the world, is the Asatru way. They don't, often because they don't know there's an alternative. They think that what they believe is Christianity, and obviously it's not. These are people as fiercely independent as you and I. These are people with as much courage as any of us. They are not into submission. They're not the kind of people who would grovel before their deities. Yet they find themselves with Christianity because they don't know there's an alternative. So instinct, sound instinct, is another thing working in our favor. Lastly, and this may not sound like an advantage, may not sound like a point for optimism, but in a way it is. Asatru is a hard time religion, and hard times are coming. It's very easy to turn the other cheek when there is no exterior threat. It is very easy to practice pacifism when there is no threat to your safety. It is very easy to love everybody in the world and to entertain this delightful illusion of world brotherhood and universal brotherhood when it's not put to the test. When it's put to the test, when reality comes right up against that particular dogma, that dogma will tend to give way. We will need a religion that espouses strength. We will need a religion that espouses honor. We will need a religion that espouses courage and heroism. Tough times are coming. As we were flying up here yesterday, Maddie was reading a novel, paperback. Title of the book is quite irrelevant. What's really important is this little advertisement in the back page. I'll read it to you, the relevant part, because it's a long way back there and you probably can't see it. It's paid for by someone called the Coalition for Literacy. And it says that by the year 2000, 2 out of 3 Americans could be illiterate. Well, they don't say so, but obviously this is a reflection of the changing demographics of our country and many other factors. What kind of a civilization are we going to be able to maintain if 2 out of 3 people are illiterate? How are we going to function? Even the establishment mouthpieces, Time, Newsweek, people like that, they're all saying it's the end of the American century. And they're saying, almost in a crowing fashion, that we're going to be the coolies of the 21st century. I don't know. They've got their own axes to grind. They've got their own agendas, some of which are hidden, some of which aren't very hidden. But nonetheless, we are headed for hard times. The world as we know it is going to change in historical terms very drastically in the next few years. And our belief is suited to those times. This gives us an incredible advantage if we're ready, if we've laid the groundwork. That's the potential. Now, let's look at the obstacles. Working out a plan, you're trying to figure out what you're going to do in the future. You've got an objective up here and you're down here and you want to go up here and you want to accomplish your goals. You've got to consider obstacles that have been placed in your way. Sometimes those are very physical obstacles or wire and unpleasant sorts of things. But there are other kinds of obstacles too, and some that we have to face are very much in our way, and they've got to be eradicated. They've got to be blown away if we're going to get to a better world. One of those obstacles is the fact that so many of our kinsmen are ignorant of their own culture. So many of our children, so many of our adults have no idea what the history of their people is. So many of our young have heard of the Greek gods, although they even get that even confused. But the Norse gods are a stranger to them. In school, and I say this as a teacher, they get information from every culture around the world, which of course vastly dilutes what they get of our own. So there's a tremendous ignorance just on the most nuts and bolts level that has to be overcome. We should do what each of us can individually to educate the people around us, because there is such a vast gulf that has to be repaired. The second point, which ties into that very much, is the mistaken idea that people have that Christianity is our native religion. The average television-watching person out there, the average individual who goes about their lives as honest, hard-working people, but not necessarily hooked into reading, history, culture, things of this sort, that person probably thinks that Christianity is our religion. They're vaguely aware that we had something before, but they don't really know what it was, and they don't really care, and it doesn't really matter anyway, and by the way, it's our favorite show on yet. So this is something that's got to be repaired. Many of these Christians would make fine Alsa folk if it could be explained to them in a clear way. If they could see that their instincts, as referred to a little while ago, are really okay, they're really sound, but they need to go with those instincts in something that is truly suitable as an expression of those instincts, and not something else that takes it and turns it off and twists it around. A third obstacle is the materialism that goes with an easy life. We have that today. We live in a world saturated with information. So much of that information comes through us through television, through the radio, through the magazines, through the pop music, and so forth. And the message is produce and consume. The message is that obscene little bumper sticker, the one who dies with the most toys wins. We live a life of toys. We don't grow up. We don't accept the responsibilities. We don't accept the beauty, the stress, the terror even of real life. And we stay children in our society far too long, like most of our lives. This materialism has got to be overcome. We've got to reach out and realize ideals. We've got to search for that which is higher. We've got to search for that which is purer, the next step up, again, on the evolutionary scale. Another factor, a crippling factor, is the low self-esteem of so many people of European American descent. Again, we are told everywhere that everything is our fault. It's our fault if anybody anywhere in the world is starving. It's our fault if anyone anywhere in the world suffers injustice. Every philosophical fallacy of history is our fault, and we're all supposed to feel horribly guilty. We're told that our ancestors were barbarians, that civilization developed almost everywhere else, and that our ancestors got it almost by contamination from these enlightened non-Europeans to the south and to the east. We need to let our people know this is not true. As a teacher, I was interested to see that modern history books, or at least modern teaching in class, does not recognize really vital things, like the fact that all the radiocarbon-14 dates that we had in Europe were revised in the 1970s. They realized that they were miscalibrated. This didn't make it into the textbooks. It didn't make it into the classrooms. We need to get it there. I get it there because I teach science, and I can tell them all about that sort of thing, and I do. But in general, it doesn't make it. These are just examples of the kind of things that we have to correct so that our self-esteem as a people is raised again. We need to have pride in ourselves. We need to feel good about our ancestry. We need to be able to say, yes, I'm proud to be a European American. I have no problem with that. I'm proud of my people. I'm proud of my ancestors. And today, that's a problem because it is not politically correct. We have to have the boldness to rise above the politically correct. We have to seize our greatness and then expand it. This last issue, the one of self-esteem, ties in with something that I've thought about a lot, and I know other people have thought about a lot too. And that is the question of why is it that we so often do not stand up for ourselves? Why is it that we are content to accept the burdens that other people would place on us? Why don't we get angry? Why doesn't somebody say, no, don't slander my ancestors? Why does no one say, no, get off my people? Why doesn't somebody get angry? Why doesn't somebody stand up for themselves? Why don't we say, you be what you are, that's fine. I'm what I am and I'm proud of it. Why is it that we acquiesce in our own dispossession? Why do we give our culture away? Why do we give our country away? You realize, by the way, that 10% of the population of El Salvador lives in California? Why do we tolerate this? Why do we acquiesce in our own death, our own suicide as a culture and as a people? Let's look at individuals. In shamanic societies, not just amongst our own folk, but around the planet, when an individual is sick, listless, defenseless, ill, lethargic, the local wise man, the shaman, goes into a trance and, metaphorically speaking, journeys into the other world because this person clearly has lost his or her soul. I think the same thing applies to groups. I think that we, people of European descent, have lost our soul. Our soul is wandering. It's wandering in the deserts of the Middle East. It's wandering anywhere except where our folk live. It's lost, and we need to reclaim it. We need our own shaman, our own series of shamans to recover it. That's our task. That's our mission. And the nice thing is, you don't have to be a professional shaman. Each and every one of us can help tap back into that. Each and every one of us, by the way we live our lives, by the way we practice Asatru, can reach back into that collective unconscious. We can recover our souls, and it's our task in this day and in this age. We can have a future so much more marvelous than our present. We can have security for our people, for our culture. We can guarantee our continued existence. We can protect ourselves from being swamped in the global morass. We can preserve our identity, extend that identity, and be proud of it, and live healthy and whole. We can live in a world governed by the principles, if not the practice of Asatru as a religion, at least the acceptance of our way of looking at the world, and we will have less bureaucracy. We will not have government on everybody's back all the time. We will not have a highly centralized bunch of people telling us how to live our lives, how to think our thoughts, what to buy, what to sell, how to work, what to think. As people of Teutonic descent, broadly speaking, and by that I include actually all the European peoples, liberty is our birthright. And liberty can be a laboratory, a wonderful ferment of variety, of experiments, of upward striving, of upward reaching. It can be the laboratory of continued evolution for that wonderful drama that started 40,000 years ago or more at some spot long ago and far away. And each of us, by the way we live, can have a role in that. Each of us has something to do. Our tasks are to sink deep the roots of Asatru by practicing our religion, by making it live, not as a philosophical abstraction, not as, well, we subscribe to this journal and I kind of like Odin, but as a living belief, a living practice. Ultimately, there is no such thing as an isolated rite or an isolated ritual, because we are all connected. The very fact The very fact of our common ancestry serves as an antenna. And we are all on the same frequency, the folk frequency. And what any of us does in some subtle way affects all the rest of us. Almost the 100-monkey effect. Remember all of that? Well, it's similar to that. We're all connected. We're part of the same folk. We're individuals. We're startlingly individual. We're definitely individual, but we are still linked, and we can use that. Practice our faith. Practice our religion. Faith is the wrong word. We're not into blind faith. We need to build Asatru from the ground up. Individuals, families, networks of families, and so forth. We don't need the permission of the state to do this. We can do this on our own. We need to have children. We need to educate those children so that our beliefs carry on into the future. We practice organic, tribal, root level on the way up, Asatru. We can rebuild the folk. We can take charge of our destiny. You're helping to do that just by being here today, at this instant. We've covered a lot of ground today. What will it all have meant? Well, that depends. It depends on whatever we make it. Because ultimately, our fate, our future, is something we make for ourselves. We are free men and women. I invite you all to join us, and by join us, I don't mean sign on a dotted line. I mean be with us in spirit as we climb up the next step, as we continue our advancement, as we carry on that drama that began so long ago. Thank you.